has been established statistically, think of this, that 61% of the adults of the United States during the past year did not read a single book. Do you know how much time the average adult spends on television? He spends 3 hours and 20 minutes a week on TV. These same adults, 50% of these same adults that spend 3 hours and 20 minutes before TV, 50% of them have not read a magazine article during the year. 25% of college students have not read a book the year after graduation. Something wrong with education when it does not inculcate a desire for learning.
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hey, Catholic pilgrims, welcome to week 37. So this is our last reading in the learning section, and next week we will move on to the wisdom section. And I have to say, I really love this last section that we're reading on memory. Reason I love it so much is because I'm kind of one of those people who tends to think back to the past. I love to draw up memories. I love to think about, past times. I kind of am an old soul. So this one was really enjoyable for me to read through, and I found myself having a lot of things I wanted to talk about, but I had to limit myself. However, this one doesn't have a lot to do with faith per se. It's more of just how we live our day-to-day life. And I think a lot of the statistics that Bishop Sheen was talking about in the beginning, again, that was in the 1950s. I think they're even higher, way higher now in our time. I don't think people are spending 3 hours a week on the television. I would say they're spending at least 3 hours a day, on some kind of screen. And I know the numbers are way higher than that. And he was upset about 3 hours a week, and things have changed so much. And so that does affect our memory. It does affect how we learn, and it does affect how we live in our present day. And so those are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about. The 3 key points to think about are preservation, tradition, and memory. Number 37, the need of memory. The experiences of the past are recorded in memory, which is made up of thousands of yesterdays. The older one gets, the more store we set by it. The young look forward, but the old look backward. There is a kind of impatience about the present, due principally to the innate yearning in the human soul for immortality, and for joys that do not fade and treasures that do not corrupt. Many a person recalls his school days and wishes that he had studied harder or else had stayed longer in school. Americans who go to Paris with their 1 year of book French become slightly provoked because the horses and dogs understand some French and they do not. Usually they try to make up for it by shouting in English to the French. It reminds one of the preacher whose notes were found on the pulpit on Monday morning by the janitor. The latter was very amused to find this writing in the margin: "Argument weak. Shout like the deuce." Today there seems to be a conspiracy against the noble faculty of memory. This conspiracy stems from 2 quarters generally: poor educational theory and bad medical practice. Education today practically ignores memory. Dr. Hutchins says that 50% of the male population of Chicago are functionally illiterate. By this he means they can read, but they cannot tell you what it means. Memory is neglected in almost all educational practice today. The neglect is in part due to the general repudiation of tradition, which should characterize every advance in culture. We in the modern world are alienating ourselves from the past under the false assumption that nothing that was ever thought before or done before is worth preserving. Children are hardly ever asked to memorize anything. Spelling is, as a result, conspicuously weak in the rising generation. Students are told that it is not so important to know anything, it is only important to know where to find it. The trouble with this idea is that you often need things at once. One knows that money is in the bank, but it does little good to know that when you want to buy a paper. Health may be found at certain resorts, but it is well to possess it independently of travel catalogs. In a former generation, the students learned by heart many of the soliloquies of Shakespeare, the great battles of history, and the line of English kings during the flowering of English literature. But pragmatism and Marxism ignore the memory of the human race, either because the only thing that matters is the useful, or because the good of former times is regarded as anti-revolutionary. Not trained in memorizing either facts or ideas, it is now almost impossible for many to make an announcement on the radio or television without reading from notes. Everyone remembers the 4th of July orator who tried to talk without any notes until he said that we all ought to be grateful to the one from whom our rights and liberties descended. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his notes, and then added, Almighty God. The other attack on memory comes from that small group of practitioners who believe the way to treat the melancholy, the worries and frustrations of people is to give them sleeping tablets so they will not remember. This only covers over the ulcerous part while rank corruption undermines all within. Memory is the autobiography of our lives, and though we cover the pages with barbiturates, the indelible record remains. Since it survives with unhappy memories, the solution is not to drug it, but to face it. Since memory contains the material on which our conscience passes judgment, it follows that the best way to rid ourselves of bad memory is to clean consciences. Then the record, which was once a shame, begins to be our glory. Since it is a fact that the more displeasing certain things are, the more apt they are to be recalled, may not this be an evidence of the mercy of God, who shows us the wound, that we can call him in as physician of our souls? So to begin this reflection, I want to start backwards. I want to start with the very last paragraph. In just the first few words, he says, memory is the autobiography of our lives. I grew up with parents who are very, very different in this regard. They're practically complete opposites. My mom is the most forward-thinking human being you will ever meet. She barely recalls anything from the past. I've tried to ask her, what her childhood was like, or what she was like before I was born, and different things like that. And she always just says, oh gosh, I don't know, and gives me no information really. Most of the information I get was from my grandparents. Or sometimes if my mom looks at an old picture of herself, then it will help to jog her memory. But for the most part, man, you are not getting anything out of my mother in the way of memories. Even memories that I've shared with her when I was, little, I will say something like, oh, remember when we went on that trip? And she'll be like, oh, yeah, I kind of remember. And that's just my mom. That's just how she is. She's always thinking forward. She does not dwell in the past whatsoever. My dad is the absolute complete opposite. And, me and him are very alike in that way. We love to talk about the past and the good memories and reminisce. Oftentimes we'll either just text each other about a good memory that we've been thinking about. We used to do email lists where we'd write down like our top 5 favorite memories from this time period. And it's just something that I love to do. I love to think back on good memories. And I make scrapbooks every year of all the pictures from that year, and I put it in a scrapbook. And, my kids really do love looking through them. And I found that the pictures of the places that we've been helps to jog their memories, and they remember things more clearly because it's drawn to mind, or they have a visual that can help, bring that memory out from the depths of their brain. And so I love making the scrapbooks for that reason, because it helps connect us with all of our wonderful experiences. And, someday maybe my kids will want to take their kids to all these places that they have been. At least that's my hope. My mom, she never, ever, hardly ever took pictures of us kids growing up. I have a brother and a sister. So there's like no documentation of our lives. And so it's hard for me to bring up a lot of very specific memories from when I was younger. But I guess I just have my dad for that. But the cool thing is that memories really are that autobiography. Because my dad is so forthcoming with memories from his past. Now, I mean, he's told me all of the memories from his childhood, the scary ones and the fun things that he did as a young boy into his teenage years, all the concerts that he went to. Because he has those memories available and he shares them with me, I have a very, very good understanding of my dad before I was ever a twinkle in his eye. And it helps me to, kind of appreciate that, he was somebody before I was ever around. He wasn't always my dad. He was just a teenager who messed up a lot and had a lot of faults and failures and worked his way through those in order to be a really great dad. And it just shows the very human side of him. It just helps me to know him so much better. Not that I don't know my mom. I know my mom very well, but I just like having that whole picture, that whole package. And so with my own children, I pretty much tell them almost everything I can possibly think of. Now, obviously, I keep some things back that aren't appropriate for them to hear, but I love to share with them, birthday parties that I went to, my first concert, just all those different things. I want them to know me inside and out, and I want them to see me as just a really complete picture. And I think my memories help connect them to the past when things were simpler, what life was like before there was all this, social media technology and even computers. I mean, my family didn't get a computer in our house until middle of the 90s, I think. But I just think it helps connect the younger generations to those that came before them. And I think that's vitally important. I love talking to my family members, my older family members, about what their lives were like. I had an aunt who was in her 90s when she died, and I loved to hear about, how she traveled on trains and all the outfits that the ladies wore. It's just so cool. It was such a different time. It was so different than how I was brought up, and I just hungered and wanted to know what life was like for her. I think we've lost that in our culture today because we're so either present focused, which is good. We should live in the present, but even when we're in the present these days, we're not really engaging in it. We're engaging in it through screens. And so I don't think we're going to have the memories to pass on to younger generations. I had all these amazing experiences when I was a kid, playing outside, playing in the creek, building dams with my friends, riding my bike all over town, going to the Dairy Queen, all of these adventures that I went on. And I tell my kids about them. But what are today's kids going to tell their kids? I played another game of Minecraft one day. Oh, that's exciting. Hey, I spent a ton of time on TikTok. Oh, That's fun. I remember I saw this one funny video one time and it really made me laugh on TikTok. Oh, neat. I mean, there's just not that substance there. And so, what are the memories that are going to be passed on? I really think that's something important to think about. The next thing I want to move on to is on page 132. Up at the top, he says, "We in the modern world are alienating ourselves from the past under the false assumption that nothing that was ever thought before or done before is worth preserving." And we have kind of a historical snobbery. Anything from the past is old, it's outdated. Traditional things are just awful. But that's such wrong thinking. And if we don't learn from our past, if we don't know those stories from our past, well, for one, we're bound to repeat the bad things because we don't learn from them. And for two, we just miss out on understanding our ancestors and having an appreciation for all that they went through to get us to the point where we're at today. And we need the older generations to share those memories. Some years back, my family did a DNA test. I connected up with my brother and sister. Our DNA's linked, thankfully. Connected with my mom, and it was so cool. But a couple years after I took it, my DNA matched with this lady, and we weren't real sure how she fit into the picture. She was a woman in her 70s, and she was hitting on my father's side of the family. Now, my father's side of the family, for when she would have fit in, was not very big. Because my grandfather had 4 children, his sister had 1, and his brother had 0 kids. And so I knew pretty much everybody in the family because it was hitting on my paternal grandfather's side. So I'm like, where does this lady fit in? And she was an older generation. And so we needed my dad to take the DNA test to find the link because she was kind of showing up as a cousin, not really sure. But if we had my dad take the test, it would for sure link with him because he was closer in age to her, a closer generation. Took some convincing, but I convinced my dad to take it. And they came back as first cousins. And this was kind of mind-blowing. First cousins on my grandfather's side. Again, my grandfather had 4 kids. His sister only had 1 kid, and we would know if she had more. And his brother never had any kids. Or so we thought. Turned out he did, and just nobody in the family knew about it. And she had been put up for adoption, and so nobody ever knew. And she'd been searching her whole life for her family. And so once we figured that out, she was like, "Oh my gosh, do you know my dad?" And unfortunately, he had passed away like a couple years before I was born, or maybe it was right after I was born. So I didn't know him at all. And my dad didn't have a ton of stories about him because he just wasn't around the family a lot. And so I felt kind of bad because I didn't really have anything to tell her about her dad. I mean, I told her what I could and what I have heard over the years, but I didn't have the memories that she wanted. I'd never heard his voice. I didn't know his personality or anything like that. But the person who had the key was my grandmother. Now, my grandfather was passed away by that time, so he would have really been the key, but since my grandmother had been married to him for so long, she knew my uncle very well, and so she was the one who held all the memories. And so this newfound cousin of ours flew out to Kansas, and I took her to see her father's grave and the house that he lived in, and then I took her over to my grandma's house, and they just sat, and my grandma got out pictures and told her stories. And you could just see this relief come over her as she heard all of these memories of her father. And it helped to fill in a lot of gaps, 70 years of not knowing anything about your dad. And she really started to feel a part of our family. And the crazy thing is that she had mannerisms so much like my grandfather's sister, my great aunt. And she'd never even been around her. But it's like DNA memory. It just knows. And the first time I saw her, I was like, oh my gosh, she's got mannerisms just like my aunt. And it was so cool. And it was so nice to be able to give her those memories. It was so nice that my grandmother was able to give her such a gift and open doors for her and help her to know a little bit about her dad. So the last part I want to touch on is at the bottom of 132. He says, but pragmatism and Marxism ignore the memory of the human race, either because the only thing that matters is the useful, or because the good of former times is regarded as anti-revolutionary. We don't just do things anymore for the sake of just doing them to enjoy them. I was talking on my social media pages this past week about how in times past, people would like go out into a field and they would write a poem about what they saw, and they would put it in their diary, never intending fame, never intending to make some money off of it. They just walked out, saw a beautiful thing, and they just felt compelled to write about it. They didn't even have to be a great poet. They just wanted to practice that art. People used to practice instruments, and they didn't all have to be concert pianists or orchestra players. They just wanted to play and do something for the pure joy of doing it. And it caused someone to comment and say, it almost seems like today people don't want to take on a hobby unless they can be a master of it. Like, I don't want to garden unless I'm a master gardener. Or I don't want to run a marathon unless I know I can be in the top 5. Or I just don't even want to run unless I can run a marathon. We have to have that level of expertise, I guess. And it's kind of the same thing with reading books, memorization. If we're not going to be the best at it, or if it's going to take us a long time, then we just don't want anything to do with it. And the truth is our ability to memorize things has shrunk because our attention spans have become so short. Like I've said before, when I write something, I don't have the gift of brevity. And so I tend to write kind of long things. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, are people going to make it through to the end of this? And it's not even that long. But our attention spans are so short that we can't memorize poems, music, favorite lines from our books, hardly anything anymore, because our thoughts are so fragmented. We don't have a long stream of thought going on to where we're just sitting and thinking and soaking things in, which is so sad. When I was young, I was a piano player, and I had to memorize this one composition that was very, very difficult. It's probably the hardest piece I ever played. And I think I was in 7th grade when I memorized it. And I eventually performed it, fully memorized, and got all high marks. I still remember how to play that song to this day. Now, my fingers aren't as nimble as they once were, but I can still play it on the piano. And that was so many years ago, but I memorized it and it stuck. And there were poems. I had this favorite book when I was a kid called Where the Sidewalk Ends, and by Shel Silverstein. I love that book. It's one of my favorite childhood books. I would read it constantly all the time when I was a kid, and I would memorize a lot of the poems in there. I can even rattle off some lines to you now. I cannot go to school today, said little Peggy Ann McKay. I have the measles and the mumps, a rash, a gash, and purple bumps. And, nobody was forcing me to do that. I just loved it so much that I read it over and over again, and I started to memorize it. And I have 'Twas the Night Before Christmas memorized, and I don't even really know how I ever memorized it, other than the fact that I just heard it so much growing up that it just soaked into my brain, and I can recite the whole thing. And I do it at Christmas time for my kids sometimes, and they're always like, wow, how did you learn that? And I'm like, I don't really know, honestly. I just sat, read it, listened, took it in, I enjoyed it, and I wanted to know it. And so I memorized it. And Like he says, we've gotten away from that because, memorization isn't useful. And nowadays we've got these phones in our pocket and we don't need to memorize things because we can just look it up so quickly. It's okay to do things even if they're not just super useful. We can do things because we just like to do them. We can enjoy the thing for the thing. And I think memorization is one of those things. It's a lost art that we've gotten away from. People used to be able to recite poems just at the drop of a hat, and people can't do that anymore. I mean, if you even suggested that to somebody, they would think you're insane. But they did. And because they had time, and because they put effort into it, because it was important to them. It was a way of being cultured and, bringing to mind something that they really loved. And I just love it. This is one of my favorite topics. And I know you can't always live in the past. I know that. And I try to live in the present moment and not do too much forward thinking to where I stress out. I mean, obviously you have to plan for the future, but memories are so important and they can enrich our lives so much. And they're just something that is very precious to me. I would give anything to be able to sit down and talk with ancestors of mine that I never knew and just be able to pick their brain and hear as many memories as they could possibly share with me. So, like I said, there's not a lot of spirituality in our readings today, but again, think about the ways that you can start to maybe change your day-to-day living to allow your mind to memorize more and to draw forth memories. A lot of that means taking a break from screen time, because we can't memorize a lot of things and we can't even draw up memories if we're constantly being entertained. And sometimes, like he says, it's good to even have bad memories recalled, because then we can deal with them and then we can face them and then we can pray about them and we can work through them instead of having them in the back of our mind and nagging at us. And it's good to bring forth the good memories too, because it helps us to see that, life isn't always, sadness or sorrow or difficult times. We've had good times too. And it does a soul good to draw on those good memories. At least I think so. So next week we move into the wisdom section, and I'll see you back here for week 38. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.